Hey, what's going on, APUSH people? I am so excited to announce that I am beginning a series on a new textbook, Eric Foner's Give Me Liberty. This one is based off of the 4th edition, but other editions will match up as well. And we're going to begin with chapter 1, so let's get going. We got 30 more chapters after this, but I got you covered. All right, let's talk about the first Americans, the settling of the Americas. It is important to note the Native Americans were a very diverse group of people. They were not just one tribe, one group of people. There were hundreds of different languages throughout North and South America, and there are many different Native American societies and cultures. Many of them came to America from the Bering Strait, which connected Alaska to Asia, and agriculture was based off of maize or corn and squash and beans. You see maize is bolded. Super important to know. Make sure you know that is corn. We'll talk a lot about it in the first couple chapters. When we're talking about Indian societies of the Americas, definitely note that Aztecs, they were in present-day Mexico in the city of Tenochtitlan, which was the largest city in the Americas at one point. And the Incas settled in present-day Peru. Now, natives did not have the advanced technology of Europeans, things like guns, metal tools, etc. So they were at a disadvantage technology-wise when the Europeans came over. And Europeans used this as a justification for conquest of natives, saying that they weren't as advanced or civilized. Natives traded across much of North America. We see the Cahokia of present-day St. Louis, and they would build these very large mounds, some as high as 100 feet in the central part of the United States. Villages were established in present-day southwestern United States. Irrigation systems were created for corn or maize, beans, and cotton, so they were very advanced agricultural techniques. These natives tended to be called pueblos by the Spanish due to the buildings. The buildings themselves were called pueblos that these natives lived in. The Great Plains Indians, they tended to be hunters due to a lack of natural resources in dry, flat land. And you'll see here the Great Basin out west and the Great Plains kind of in the central. Those two areas are where Native Americans tended to be nomadic, and there will be the introduction of the horse by the Europeans that will drastically change their way of life. On the eastern part of North America, we have a mix of agriculture and hunting for Native Americans, and we see the Great League of Peace, or the 5 Iroquois nations here, and there's a flag for the Iroquois Native Americans. And native societies were incredibly diverse across North America, as I just mentioned. All right, going over to Native American religion. Many Native Americans practice animism, which is the belief that there were spirits that were found in nature, and shamans and medicine men held great power. And this kind of ran contradictory to Christianity and European religions. And this helped many Europeans believe that they needed to convert natives to Christianity. So particularly Spain, we will see that they will begin to convert Native Americans, or try to convert Native Americans. The native view of land was vastly different from the European view. Natives viewed it as a common resource for all, whereas Europeans viewed it as individual holdings that would fence off property. Gift giving played an instrumental role in native society. When we're talking about gender relations, many societies were matrilineal, which is vastly different from European views. And matrilineal means that the family was focused on the mother's side, not the father's side. So the mothers held incredible power. And native women owned tools and dwellings, and English married women could not be legally independent. So we see some differences between Native American gender roles and European gender roles. Very important to note. All right, European views of the Indians. Initially, they were viewed as either noble savages or uncivilized, not very well viewed by Europeans. As time passed, they were more often seen as uncivilized and barbaric. And England, France, and Dutch believed natives did not use land, quote, so they could not claim it. So this idea that because they didn't have individual holdings or individual claims to the land, natives did not own it. And Europeans saw natives as not free. This idea of owning private property, religion, gender roles, things that defined Europeans as being free, really most of it was based off of owning private property. And natives did not own private property. It was a common resource. All right, Indian freedom and European freedom will continue with this theme. Natives not having established governments was seen as barbaric by Europeans, these elaborate governments that Europeans had created. Natives resented being used as slaves, and in many cases they ran away and resisted slavery. Many natives were actually sold into slavery in the British West Indies, where it was harder for them to run away. When we're talking about Christian liberty, freedom in Europe often meant embracing Christianity, not so much for Native Americans. European countries dictated which form of Christianity to practice, and dissenters were often persecuted. So we'll see Spain is a Catholic country, and England will be a Protestant country. And both countries are not very embracing of religious dissenters or those that go against that religion. Freedom and authority. European kings claim the right to rule from God. This is known as the divine right, and here is King Louis XIV, one of the more famous divine right rulers from France. Men had complete authority over families, again, vastly different than Native American societies that were based on matrilineal. And this idea of coverture was especially found in England, where women surrendered their legal identities when married. They could not own property or sign contracts. So if a woman owned property and she got married, her husband would then inherit her property. Property requirements to vote limited those that could participate in voting. So in many, if not all instances, we will see that there are property requirements to vote, so that will reduce the amount of people to a small amount that are eligible to vote. And many liberties that we know today did not exist then. Things like freedom of religion, economic opportunities, etc. did not exist back then. All right, Chinese and Portuguese navigation. Zhang He, 62 ships this dude had, and 25,000 men explored the coast of Africa. That is an enormous amount of ships. He's basically showing off to Africa and the world, look at what I got here. Who else has 62 ships and 25,000 men? Yeah, I didn't think so. And they sought to demonstrate China's advancements. Navigation became much more advanced through things like the caravel, which is this fast ship, the compass, and the quadrant, which improved sailing efficiency. And the caravel was a ship that was introduced by the Portuguese. Now, the Portuguese are going to establish trading posts in West Africa, this area over here in orange, and they will focus on trading Africans as slaves to the New World. African slaves traditionally were criminals and captives in Africa. And between 1450 and 1500, 100,000 slaves were transported to Spain and Portugal. This number is going to skyrocket in the New World. And we'll see in 1502, the first slaves were sent to the Caribbean, where many of these slaves were sent. Now, Columbus, do not think that he thought the world was flat. He didn't. He just thought it was smaller than what other people thought. And he sought to increase trade with Asia and spread Christianity. So he wanted to seek a water route to Asia. And Spain eventually is going to sponsor him in the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria in 1492. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. All right, let's talk about contact. Columbus landed at the Bahamas, and Hispaniola initially became the center of the Spanish Empire right in the Caribbean. Now, Spain was inspired by wealth, power, and the spread of Christianity, the 3 G's that you may have heard, gold, glory, and God. By the way, I have a video. Please check that out in the description, comparing European exploration goals and European imperial goals. Conquistadors, these were these leaders that overtook, these Spanish leaders that overtook Native Americans. We have Hernan Cortez here. He conquered the Aztecs and Tenochtitlan, and advanced weapons and disease helped the Spanish conquer the natives. And we see an illustration here, a Native American illustration of natives being killed by diseases, things like smallpox and measles. Pizarro, he conquered the Incas in Peru. He was another conquistador. And the Columbian Exchange, this is the idea of the spread of goods, disease, and people across the Atlantic that forever changed both hemispheres. Very important to know this. This stuff is in the curriculum, so make sure you know this. Things like potatoes and corn from the Americas increased the population in Europe drastically, and horses, guns, and diseases from Europe transformed native life in the Americas. Again, horses on the Great Plains, guns, these things made hunting much easier and more efficient for Native Americans, and diseases in some areas, as many as 90% of Native Americans were killed as a result of not having immunity to European diseases. Spain sought to acquire gold and silver. It was all about money for these European countries. Mexico City became its new center in North America and will continue to be for many, many years. The king and the Catholic Church administered the colonies. They had a lot of say in the power over the colonies, and Spanish appointees from Spain ruled the colonies. So we'll see it's a very strict, tight control. Now, natives were enslaved initially in gold and silver mines, and they performed other labor. One characteristic of Spanish settlement is that most of the settlers were men, and they would often intermarry with natives. And here we have a Spanish man married to a Native American woman, and their child was known as a mestizo, somebody who has Spanish and Native American ancestry. So we'll see the emergence of class systems as well. Spain hoped to eventually assimilate or bring the natives into Spanish society, and Spanish America eventually morphed into combinations of native, Spanish, and African culture. So we have a blending of these three different cultures here in Spanish America. Okay, so as the Spanish are conquesting, they need to justify the exploitation of Native Americans. And they believe that natives were expected to adopt European ways, especially religion, and those that resisted were seen as uncivilized heathens or savages. So they were given an opportunity to convert, and if they did not, they would be seen in a much more negative light. The papal line of demarcation was instituted by Pope Alexander VI, and this divided the New World between Spain and Portugal. So we see here this purple line, everything to the east belongs to Portugal, and everything to the west belongs to Spain. That's why in Brazil they speak Portuguese, and pretty much everywhere else they speak Spanish. Now, Spain sought to spread Catholicism throughout the Americas. I've mentioned that several times. That's a theme that we're talking about. And Spain used this as a justification in order to save Native Americans. And enslaving natives and converting them was a way to save them from their backwardness, is how the Spanish would argue or justify the treatment of Native Americans. So let's talk about Bartolomé de las Casas. Very important dude. You should be familiar with him. Now, he writes something called A Very Brief Account of the Destructiveness of the Indies, and many other writings, but this is a very important one. Here he is. He advocated for better treatment of Native Americans. He believed that natives were not savages, but rational beings who deserved to be treated much better. In 1542, Spain passes things known as the New Laws, which say that Indians would no longer be enslaved in the encomienda system. And the encomienda system was abolished 8 years later in 1550. I have a very detailed video on that. Check it out in the description below, as well as other videos, PowerPoints, fill in the blanks, everything you need. It's in the description and at APUSHreview.com. Now, the Black Legend emerges, and this depicted Spain as a brutal and exploitive empire. And a lot of this goes back to de las Casas' writings about the harsh treatment of Spain. You see here's a conquistador, and he is feeding a Native American child to a dog. So this really paints Spain in a negative light. Juan Ponce de Leon, he explored Florida in 1513, and other expeditions wreaked havoc on native societies in North America, again due to conquest, but most importantly due to diseases, the spread of diseases that natives were not immune to. When we're talking about Spanish Florida, Spain sought to establish a military base in Florida. The St. Augustine is the oldest site in the U.S. that it has continuously been inhabited by Europeans. And the Spanish missions were established to spread Christianity, and oftentimes they dubbed as military bases. In the Southwest, we'll talk about Juan de Onate, and he was a conquistador that attacked and subdued natives in Acoma. The Pueblo Revolt, look at that. I got another video for you in the description. Very important turning point in Spanish-Native American relations. Absolutely know this. Basically, we have some Spanish friars that sought to eliminate Pueblo Indians' practices that were inconsistent with Christianity, so they really cracked down on the natives. They revolted, they killed hundreds of Spanish, and they expelled them for 12 years, for a dozen years. Now, eventually the Spanish recaptured the area in 1692, but they became much more tolerant and accommodating of native practices. All right, let's jump over to French and Dutch empires. We'll see here New France is in blue, and the Dutch is really going to be in one area, and that's going to be New York City. The red here is Great Britain, or the English Empire, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. Now, New Netherland and New France, they focus more on trade than settlement in large numbers of colonists. The French in particular, initially, they were only fishermen and fur traders that settled in North America. Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec in 1608. That's 1 year after the English settlement of Jamestown. And there was no representative assembly in New France. So the French government, much like the Spanish, had tight control over New France. 80% of the settlers were men. Guess who they're going to intermarry with? You got it, Native Americans, and we'll see the emergence of a group of people known as Métis, M-E-T-I-S. They will be mixed French and mixed Native American ancestry. So the French, again, they focus on the fur trade, and this required friendly relations with the natives. They got along pretty well with Native Americans. Christian Indians were allowed more autonomy or independence or self-rule than from other European countries. And the Métis, as I just mentioned, children of French and Native American ancestry. The Dutch Empire, Henry Hudson, he explored New York on behalf of the Dutch East India Company. And the Dutch were the ones that invented the joint stock company. This is when people get together and pool their money together and invest in colonies. This is the prelude to capitalism and the corporation that is around today. All right, Dutch freedom of press and private religious practice was afforded to the Dutch in private, not in public, but in private. Initially, the Dutch dominated the Atlantic slave trade, and unlike the English, Dutch women were able to keep separate legal identities when married. In private, individuals were allowed to practice the religion, but not in public. Religious dissent was tolerated so long as it remained private. So it was okay to practice a different religion, but you better keep it to yourself, according to the Dutch. And individuals were not executed for holding the wrong religious beliefs in New Netherland. All right, settling New Netherland. The Dutch encouraged migration by giving free land after 6 years to people who would settle there. Many immigrants did not settle in New Netherland, but in other areas of North America. The Dutch sought to trade and not to conquer North America. And again, New Netherland, New Amsterdam, right here in present-day New York City. Settlement in native territory could not occur until the land was purchased from natives, so the Dutch treated the natives much better and actually paid them for the land instead of taking it. Commonalities between the French, Spanish, and Dutch in terms of exploration? Well, we have the spread of Christianity, use of technology, new legal systems, and economic enterprises such as the Joint Stock Company. Warfare and disease were all a result. All right, let's do a quick recap of this chapter. Maize, know it. Southwestern portion of the United States, it's corn. Great Plains, hunters, lack of resources, things like the horse and guns, how it transformed Native American life. Native religion and gender roles, be able to describe them. Coverture, what the heck does that mean? Oh, that's right, it's when women gave up rights. Reasons for the exploration, know the 3 Gs, new technology like the caravel, like the compass, the Columbian Exchange. Holy cow, know the impacts on the Americas as well as Europe. What was justification for treatment of natives? How did the Spanish justify their harsh treatment? Then Comienda system, what the heck is that thing and why did it end? The Pueblo Revolt, why could that be considered a successful failure? And finally, comparing the Spanish, French, and Dutch colonies. Definitely know them. That is screaming to me a short answer or an essay topic. All right, thank you guys very much for watching. If you haven't already, please take a moment and subscribe to my channel. I will have all these chapter videos done for you for May. Make sure you check out the other videos in the description as well as APUSHreview.com. I have a new short answer question every single Monday. You name it, I got it for you there. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I thank you guys very much for watching and have a good day.